Welcome everyone, and I would encourage, like, if you want to scoot up. I'm going to maybe not use the microphone. Can y'all hear me in the back? I'm Rachel Friend. Again, welcome. I'm interim policy director, stepping in for Jonathan Singer, who's on a leave right now. And we're here to have a property tax roundtable, formerly a property tax debate. So if you didn't get the memo, due to a special session, we have sort of juggled what we're doing today. And I want to welcome our panelists, starting at the end here. We have Boulder County Treasurer Paul Weissman, Judy Amabile, State House Representative, next to him, and then Scott Wasserman with Colorado's for Local Communities. And we have just added Cindy Braddock, our county assessor. Thank you for joining us at the last minute. And just some housekeeping. There's food and snacks and drinks in the back, and bathrooms are right at this door to the left. With that, also we are recording this session, so hopefully everyone's okay with that. Again, Cindy right here, thank you for last minute addition. We don't have you up there, I'm sorry. Okay, so we're gonna kick off, if you don't mind, Representative Amabile, with an overview of sort of how we got to this and how a special session works. Because when we started this, we thought we were gonna be here debating two potential ballot measures. And now we're looking at a special session next week. So if you can just give a little background and tell us how a special session works.
Okay. If I don't have to use this mic, I won't either. Can you guys hear me okay? I've been known as a loud.
I'll shut the door just to block this makes sense.
Okay, so if it's helpful, I'll give a little history. This not this past session, but the one before, the legislature. I mean, I should go way further back than that, but we repealed Gallagher, over to repeal Gallagher. We had made a promise to address how we do property tax. Didn't get that done, but 2 years ago, we referred ballot measure HH to the ballot, and it had a bunch of provisions in it that would reduce property taxes and then reduction in the table we went to say in a way that's kind of the easiest. That was rejected by the voters. And so in November of last year, we reconvened and had a special session, and we put forward a 1-year property tax measure and set up this property tax commission. And that passed through the special session. We did the things that we in the legislature can do without asking the voters permission to do it. And so that's affected your property tax, the bill that you paid and or some
all we paid. We just
so the property tax commission met all during the session. And at the very end of the session, presented us with a bill that addresses property tax in a variety of ways, which we'll talk about today in greater depth. And I think most of the bill sponsors and the people who were working on the property tax commission thought that they were working towards a deal with proponents who were working on putting these two property tax measures on the ballot, 108 and 50. And that at some point they would figure out a compromise, and that would be in that bill that we passed. But in fact, right before the bill got introduced, we heard, well, we didn't actually get a deal. We're close, but we didn't get a deal. But we're still running this bill, and we still want you to vote for it. We still think it's a good way to address property tax. So we passed that bill, and then lo and behold, they did put these ballot measures on. And so now the ballot measures are on. If they pass, they will negate what we did in that bill. That bill will go away. And these ballot measures will be how we do property tax. They will affect how we do our property tax. So the ballot measures aren't polling well, and I believe that that is part of why the proponents of those ballot measures decided maybe there is still a compromise to be had. And I gave the wrong number. Anyway, so we're 233. So now we're going to have another special session. And I can't tell you how unusual this is to have two special sessions in 1 year on the same topic. And during this special session here, there is a framework that just turned into a bill draft that got distributed this morning. I think I can say this morning, even if it was 1 o'clock in the morning.
It's this right here. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, these are some of the parts of the framework.
I'll cover a breakdown of it in my presentation.
Yeah, whatever. So this framework has been being worked on by the Property Tax Commission, working with the ballot members. And this is the bill that is going to be the main focus of the special session coming up. You can pass a bill in 3 days. So this special session might last 3 days. Hopefully we will get something passed, but that also causes the proponents of these ballot measures to take them off the ballot, which we have until September 9th to do, I believe. But it's also possible that this won't pass. And I'm certainly hearing from a lot of my colleagues that they're not happy with not only the process, but also they're not that happy with the voting agreed to it. And so I guess anything could happen in the special session. There are also, my understanding is there's this one bill, and there are 18 other bills that are going to be introduced during this special session, or they're at least being drafted right now for introduction in the special session. Those bill drafts have not been shared with anyone other than the sponsors of those bills. I've heard some rumors about what might be in those. I haven't seen any drafts myself. And that's not unusual. Oftentimes the bill sponsors will hold their draft close to the vest until they're ready to pop out of the cake with it. It seems like a funny way to handle it, given how upset everybody is that this draft is just coming out now. But I'm more a fan of putting it out there so that people can start to respond. But in any case, we don't really know. The special session could be very smooth. We come to a deal, we pass a bill, they take the ballot measures off, and away we go. But it might not go that way. And so that's my little introduction.
Thank you, Judy. I think that's so. If everybody up here seems at all discombobulated, it's because this is all happening like in real time. Like I think I heard you say that you haven't seen the draft of what they're.
No, in fact, I know a bunch of people on the Property Tax Commission, and I called the ladies last night to try to get drafts, and they haven't had it. So, the bill didn't come from them.
So this is happening in real time. So I'm gonna ask
Put it in the context, yeah.
maybe to follow up on Judy, like, you know, this is the process of what we're gonna do. Could our county assessor and treasurer maybe jointly tell us where we are now and the impacts that'll happen to the county if something like 50 and 108 or an unknown compromise happen, and maybe also give us a little bit of information about 233, the bill that passed in 2024.
And I'll just say, if it's helpful in my presentation, I'll be reviewing 233 and all these issues. So
Perfect.
whenever you got as well as
Okay.
special session.
All right, sounds great. So you wanna start with Scott and then fill in, or you wanna go?
Either way, why don't we, what I was planning to do, I'll go and jump in,
Yeah,
Scott,
perfect.
when we do this. What I figured we'd talk about is sort of go, and I hate using the terminology like this, but I'm gonna sort of best for taxpayers, which has a worse for government, and start with that shift over. Best for taxpayers, quite frankly, is Amendment 50, which is on the ballot, was certified on the ballot last year, puts a 4% cap in statewide revenue increase from property taxes. Statewide 4%, if it's projected it goes up more than 4%, you can't do that without the vote of the people. There's a whole lot of questions in there, and unfortunately, Michael Fields isn't here for it. He always says, when asked, the legislature will figure it out for the questions. 4% statewide is a pretty tough deal. I have a breakdown of values and property tax revenue through my lifetime. And I'm older than I look, but in 60 years, only 18 times has property taxes risen less than 4%. There's been a couple times it's gone backwards, but traditionally it grows at a rate higher than 14%, all but those, 18 times out of 60. Nobody here got me particularly, thank you. You turned 62 this year, didn't you?
60, God.
60. Oh, shit, let's turn 60 this year. And it wasn't this lifetime in my lifetime,
Yeah.
18 times out of 4%. Now, so the question is that,
We're cut the tape.
the question that I think are important that Michael Field says the legislature will have to figure out is if it's going over 4% statewide, did one entity or another throw that over? Is it a first come, first served on who gets the property tax increase? Who gets to vote? Does the whole state have to vote or just the district that threw it over the top? Those type of questions. Nobody's property tax is going down. Okay, let's start with that. It's how much up it's gonna go. As a starting reference point, and this is what I rail on all the time, and this is frankly where the governor was until the last 3 days of last session. Property taxes truly are a local issue. It's the mill levies of the authorities that we collect for that set your property taxes. Now, if I lived in the city of Boulder, I'd be pissed, right? Last year, we started collecting for the library district. About $17 million. Right? The city of Boulder did lower their mill levy to make up for that $17 million that they're no longer spending. And in the second year of the library district, since they kept their mill levy flat, they got every penny of the value increase. Their revenue increase in property taxes year over year, 2022 tax year, 2023 tax year we collected this year, about 19% increase. Right? City of Boulder itself kept its mill levy flat. Means they kept every penny of the value that they were entitled to, raised about 18% more revenue than they did last year. Almost every fire district in the county kept their mill levy flat. I understand fire equipment is expensive. I get it, they do good work, but they took every penny that they were entitled to. To their credit, we get hacked a lot. The county of Boulder took what's called a mill levy credit. They could have legally taken in more, but they didn't. So instead of the 19% increase that went into the county government, about 25% of your taxes, they went up about 6.5%. The big dog in the fight is always the school district, statewide. The big dog is always the school districts. If you live in the city of Boulder, about 52% of your taxes go to Boulder Valley School Districts. I thank you. I drive the bus in the morning. Some of that comes to me. St. Grayson Valley, if you live up in Longmont, about 54% of your taxes goes to the school district. The floor of the mill levy for the school district is set by the state legislature and the School Finance Act. If St. Grayson Valley schools or Boulder Valley schools went lower than the mill levy they set this year, they would have also been cut by the state. So they didn't. I mean, that's just bad policy, especially in a school district with declining enrollment. People need to drink more wine, go to cheese, bring date nights, whatever it takes to get the enrollment back up.
Wait, was that recorded?
Usually at the bus station, I'm a little more direct at that. I really didn't need to be direct. I didn't need to dance around. Enrollment numbers are down, so they'd be stupid to go below the floor and not just take a property tax cut of the state tax. So it really is those local ones. Initiative 50, which again was certified on the ballot way before the session or anything else, caps the statewide at 4%. You can make an argument that says, and they do, these governments can't control themselves, obviously, City Boulder, library, firemen, we're gonna have to control it for them, right? So that's 4%, that good. Just this morning or last night, I'm not sure which one, Initiative 108 got certified for the ballot. They got their signatures checked. This is sort of a middle ground between where 50 50 is and 233, which we'll talk about, although middle sort of the relative term. Because all they're doing is shifting the burden. It's the same money, less in property taxes, but now the state legislature has to backfill that loss. Estimated at about $3 billion. I can tell you straight up, if you live in the city of Boulder or live in the Boulder area, you do not want that. I served in the legislature when we were cutting budgets. And I can tell you if they're cutting $3 billion because they got to back the locals, the first place it's going to come from is higher ed. Because that's where it comes from first every year. And we know what an economic driver the University of Colorado is for us, just like Laramie County, Fort Collins knows what an economic driver CSU is for them. Same with Mesa State College. Anywhere there's higher ed, that's the first place the legislature cuts. Where they'll also may or may not have to cut if 108 passes, is in the table refund mechanism. So that second place to cut usually is that senior property tax exemption. And you can make an argument that, a senior that owns their own home, probably needs it less than the kid trying to buy a house. You can make that argument. A member of the Property Tax Commission made that argument up in Fort Morgan. And I absolutely see where it's tougher for a kid coming in than it is for a senior. So, okay, they get rid of it, but I got to tell you what, as somebody who's had to take that vote more than once in the legislature, it's not a vote that anybody in the legislature wants to take, cutting that senior property tax exemption, but it's $154 million. That kind of stuff adds up to it. All that 108 does, it doesn't lower any tax burden, shifts it all to the state. Since the time of Mesa Verde, Colorado's been a boom and bust economy. I've seen the state and been in the legislature when it's been bust. I've been in the state where they've been having, it's like throwing chum in a shark pit, as Jack Paul used to say, when people go out for the money and try to fund whatever they can. It's going to be boom and bust, and it won't be forever that the state legislature will even be able to backfill what they have to do now on business person property tax, let alone this bigger burden of about $3 billion statewide. It's going to decimate the state budget. You as a taxpayer, you might be not quite as good off as you would be under Initiative 50, but a little bit better off. The governments will be okay, not great, because I think that puts a lot of uncertainty in there. Our economy is going to bust again at some point. It always does. People that were around during oil days, we saw everything that was in the Denver metro area, oil related. The corporations go down to Texas again, and they never really come back. That was the oil bust in the 80s. You had the high tech bust, which we're actually really good at. I just discovered something yesterday. Anybody like baseball? I know we got a lot of football going on. Do you know that Major League Baseball does their apps and their streaming from here in Boulder? They do the pitch clock from here in Boulder. We have all these high-tech nerds. Are you guys them? We have all these high-tech nerds that live in Boulder. Yeah, that companies like thank you Google and Major League Baseball and that kind of stuff have figured out. Well, that's been bust before. I mean, hello Storage Tech, hello Sun Microsystems. Those kind of things are going to be unfortunately, I think, bust again. We saw it with Corona, where had it not been for the federales, Colorado would have really been busted. We would have been more bust locally had they not done that. So we're going to go bust sometime, which puts 108 and the local governments in the state, I think, in jeopardy. Out of all that, the legislature, the last 3 days of session passed Senate Bill 133. Senate Bill 133, to their credit, the legislature recognized a couple things. 233, I'm sorry. So it's a little two and everything, and then since I have the glasses down here, you can see the squiggle. The 233 was passed last 3 days of the legislature as sort of this arrangement, as Representative Molly said, to try to end these ballot issues, which I think would be, while good for taxpayers, if you don't like consistent services, but want to just pay less, would be bad for the government to collect for. They recognize a couple things. They recognize, first of all, that home rule cities and home rule counties, which are a few of counties, really shouldn't be part of the game. They recognize that you gotta somehow reflect growth in a formula. That's one thing that I'm really disappointed that Initiative 50 doesn't do. Recognized growth. If, IBM is a big dog as far as property taxes here in Boulder County. You get a couple more IBMs in some of these districts, and I tell you what, you got real money growth. There's a disincentive, if 50 passes, to get some of those big dogs into the county, because they pay a whole lot of property taxes. They recognize growth in 233. They recognize existing bonds in 233 that are out there. Sort of took them out of this formula. But what they also did is went back to a thing that's called Arbiscal bird, which is already in statute. It lives in Title 29, which puts a limitation of 5.5% on most governmental entities of what they can grow. Now, there's been a whole lot of entities that have since, and an Arbiscal bird was passed before Tabor as an attempt to stop Tabor. Hey, you're with the legislature, we're trying to fix that. Arbiscal was a rep from Pueblo, Democrat. Mark Bird was the senator from Colorado Springs, Republican. They got together and figured out, okay, let's put this 5.5% cap. 233 strengthens that 5.5% cap again, but again, it recognizes things that I think are important, or that they thought were important. The bonding that's out there, and the growth that inevitably comes. I'm sure that you guys did what I did and spent a whole lot of time reading the Division of Property Taxation from the state's 1,021 page annual report, which they put out, and you saw that growth number. What, you have it? Did you read it?
That was in
1,021 pages. It's interesting. The year I was born, I'll just throw numbers out there for no apparent reason. The year I was born, the total property tax revenue for the state, for everything they collected for, including state, was $278,480,284, right? Today, that amount is $15,246,054,940. Pretty damn big increase in property tax revenue over 6 years. You expect that. My beer doesn't cost more, but beer costs more than it did in 1964. Too, everything sort of costs more. And the unfortunate reality is, well, I shouldn't say unfortunate reality. The reality is for government, I'll take the unfortunate out of there. A very large percentage of what they spend is in people. My first job was $2.05 an hour minimum wage, selling shoes. I also got commission when I made a lot of money. Paid my first year of college a bunch of shoes in the old Russell Mall. As that was the wage per hour. People cost more in now, and especially in our current economy. Anybody who has a business knows that it costs, unfortunately, well, I shouldn't say unfortunately, it costs people more. I'll stop using the unfortunately word, but I keep throwing that out there. The Property Tax Commission, I went to their meeting up in Fort Morgan. They had a bunch of statewide meetings. The only one that really fit my schedule was up in Fort Morgan, which was really fun to actually go to. Their charge was to go around and talk to folks about sort of options and where they are and needs. And it was interesting to hear the folks that were at that commission meeting. You did have the fire districts that showed, the real numbers of equipment costing well over $1 million for one truck that they need. You did have the town administrators. When I was first in the legislature in 1994, the 1 lane mile to pave was $1 million. It ain't $1 million anymore. It is well over $6 million a mile, a lane mile to pave. All this stuff costs more. So the need, quite frankly, for governments is at that higher level. Is it 4%? Could they probably make it with 4%? I don't know, maybe. Is it 19%? Hell no. It ain't 19%. In the library districts, and John wrote a great op-ed, if y'all read it. I'm sure you did. I'm sure you had him autograph it. Their line was, we want to create a reserve. Well, you don't create a reserve in 1 year. $5 million reserve, and when you got stuff like that going on, governments need to also rein themselves in where they can, where it makes sense. My gut feeling is it's probably somewhere in between the 19% that went up statewide, this is 19.5% that went up statewide year over year, 22 to 23. And the 4% is sitting in initiative 50. I'm gonna stop with that just because just because, Scott's a whole hell of a lot, smarter than me. When I was in the legislature, he was down there helping out a whole lot, and he follows fiscal issues probably closer than anybody but the budget directors in both the governor's office and the legislature. So he's much smarter than me. So we'll pitch to Scott. I'm not going to pitch to Scott.
Yeah, I want to interpret though, but I do want to give our county assessor just a moment to add anything you want before we turn it over to. Sure.
Okay, who put Freed up there? Who picked the picture?
That's
Freed?
Tyler.
I did.
Is that Tyler?
I did, it's a campaign slide.
All right. Sorry about that. I just saw the picture. It's old. You gotta flip it over.
All right, Paul's a hard act to follow, so I'm not as energized and I'm not on the revenue side of the formula. So assessors are tasked with establishing fair and equitable values. And none of these, Senate Bill 233 and the prior bill to it last year, don't change how we value property. So we still are constrained by the state constitution and the state statutes as to how we do things, what our calendar looks like. That hasn't changed much at all with these bills or with the two ballot initiatives. So what has changed is the formula by which we arrive at assessed value and hand taxes to the treasurer. So that's become far more complicated in these bills. 233 splits local government out from schools. They'll have different assessment rates. And Scott covered this in greater detail. And so when I look at these, my first thing is, can I do it? Can I deliver this? And we believe we can. So that's always a struggle. It also makes it much harder for us to explain to citizens what's going on with their property. And so they come in and I've got this convoluted. So I'm concerned about what comes out the other side, how we actually explain this to people and help them understand what is going on with their values. That's a huge part of mine and Paul's job. It's explaining to people what's going on with their property taxes. I differ a bit with Paul about 50 and 108. I think they will have really tough impacts on our communities. The bigger concern for me is if this session doesn't arrive at something and either one or both of these ballot initiatives pass, there's no relief for your 2024 taxes payable in 2020. So assessment rates will go back up in January. And there'll be no adjustments to value. Currently this year, there was a $30,000 adjustment for industrial and commercial improved properties and $55,000 adjustment to value for residential properties. That all goes away. And so that really concerns me because those citizens show up at my door and they have every right to be concerned. And as you all know, we just went through a cycle where we saw an average, a median increase in Boulder County of 35% value. That's median, so some are higher and some are lower. If there's no resolution, people will get a tax bill for that full amount in January, February. So to me, that's a bigger issue with all of this, is if those ballots initiatives stay and either one of them get a yes vote, next year is going to be really difficult for citizens. So it doesn't change my work. My work will be what it is. But it's difficult. We have an aging community. We have a lot of seniors. We have a fair number of senior exemptions on the books, veteran exemptions. Just because your house is worth a lot doesn't mean you can afford it. There are a lot of people here with fixed incomes. And just because you're living in a small home that it doesn't have a high value doesn't mean you aren't capable of paying taxes. So I think house value, home value isn't always the best measure of what someone can afford in their taxes. So we hear the hard luck stories. I know Paul does too. They walk in the door every day. But how do I do this? How do I afford this? What do I pay? Do I do groceries? Do I do medicine? Do I do taxes? There is relief in the property tax deferral system program, which is now at the state level. It doesn't do a whole, I think it's around $600 or $700 in taxes, which is something, nothing to sneeze at. It's also what the senior exemption does. You can't do both, choose. So we have communities, people in our community who are really struggling. So I'm mostly worried about if there isn't a solution, what happens next year? What will citizens be facing?
Can I ask a clarifying question? Sure. So next year, if we don't get this passed, and one of these ballot measures passes, taxing entities could lower their mills in response?
They could, absolutely.
If 50 passes though, there's no way in hell they would, because they know the following year they're capped at 4%. So they bank what they could while they have the money.
So yeah, it's tough. And I think Scott, you probably have way more information on this than I do. And I'm in the middle of your.
Yeah, no, that's okay. Yeah, and so should I?
Take it away.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna try to do this sitting down. It's a little hard. So first of all, let me just, I'm just gonna stand, and I'll just kind of, first of all, thank you to all of you, and thanks for having me today. It's great that I haven't seen Paul Weissman in a really long time. Worked with him many, many years ago, and I remember having coffee with Representative Molloway before she was even thinking about doing this work, and maybe she's rethinking that. And to Cynthia, I just apologize for all of the chaos we created for you over the last few years. So let me just say, I'm from the campaign that is opposing Initiative 50 and 108. Prior to this, I was the director of the Bell Policy Center for 8 years. Focusing on economic mobility and fiscal policy issues. I would say right now, probably the best way to describe our campaign is that we are on cautious pause. I would also like to think that we were so effective in telling people how bad Initiative 50 and 108 were that many of them demanded a special session rather than, put these issues at risk. So what I'm going to try to do very briefly today is walk you through maybe in a little bit more detail some of the things you've already heard about. Thank you so much. So first of all, I just want to show you two maps. I like maps. You're looking at two things here. One is, and it's like, so why are we here? Now I can give you the long version. This is the 303 class. Happy to do the 1.0. But the real reason we are in the situation we are in is because, of course, we repealed the Gallagher Amendment, which took a cap off of residential property values. I'm not going to get too into Gallagher right now, but in 2022, 2023, we saw a historic spike in values across the state, right? I think that was largely a product of the pandemic, a lot of people moving around, values going up in certain communities. And what I want to point your attention to, and this is so critical, and Paul said this, property taxes are local taxes, okay? And if you look at what went on in the state, assessments did not go up uniformly across the state. We have different markets across the state. Obviously, the mountain community saw a huge spike. The Denver metro area saw a big spike. But you also see other areas of the state, particularly in the rural areas, that did not see the kind of increases that those communities saw. So one of the challenges in this debate is that when you pass one-size-fits-all uniform policies and just to give you some perspective, this is making it easy by just showing you the counties. There are almost 5,000 local districts across the state. That is 5,000 different algorithmic formulas that all get changed when we pass statewide measure. Now, what I also want to show you on the right, and this is not the best color scheme we're working on it, is that if you look at some of the changes that the legislature made, they did some uniform value exemption. So everyone got $55,000, I think someone shared, off the value of their home. Problem with that is that, again, not every single community has the same property tax base. So what you actually see, and this sort of defies common sense to most people, is that you actually see negative revenue results for many counties in the state. I was looking at Saguache County, they got slammed. They saw a 77% reduction in total revenue for all their districts in their county, right? So I just really think it's so essential when you think about 50 and 108 and all these property tax policies to understand that we are a big state with very diverse marketplaces, very different property tax mixes, more residential, more commercial, more ag, more oil and gas. And so trying to find one solution for all these districts is very hard. Let's go to the next.
We have a question, and I'm sorry, because
Yes.
it's probably the whole point of your slide. Well, how do you have that level of valuation and growth and then so little in actual revenue increase between those two graphics?
So, I mean, in the dark blue, they did see big revenue growth, but in these places, first of all, to start with, their values only average went up 12.3%.
Is your scale 4.4% or is that 44% tax revenue growth?
That's 44%
got it.
and negative
Okay.
22%.
Then we're good.
Yeah, okay, cool. And I'll come back to some of these things. Okay, so don't have time to go through everything that the legislature did. If I was in campaign mode and not special session mode, what I would say is this is what responsible revenue property tax reform looks like. We got 92 out of 100 votes in the state legislature on this bill. That doesn't happen on anything, okay? And there was a lot of push and pull and a lot of compromise. As Paul talked about, right? We instituted a new 5.5% cap on local district revenues, okay? Many communities, probably this community as well, debruced a long time ago and actually got rid of some of the statutory limitations. So for every community in the state that had already overridden their statutory limit, not just even the Tabor limit, but also the statutory, they now actually have to go back to voters and ask them if they want to go over that cap again. So we put that in place starting in 2025. As Cynthia talked about, one of the big innovations in Senate Bill 233 was decoupling school districts from local districts. I can get into that. I'm not going to go down the school finance rabbit hole right now, but we can talk more about why they felt decoupling those assessment rates. And my apologies to the assessors for us having done that. The other thing, and so you can see here, two different rates moving into 2025, right? Now, something that's really important I'm going to come back to is I told you that one of them, I'm not going to say mistake, one of the things the legislature did in 2023 was they said, everyone gets $55,000 off the value of your home. And that is the exemption on top of the assessment rate reduction. Problem is, what if your home is only worth $200,000, as it is in places like Logan County or in, pick many of our rural communities, right? Values are much lower. Well, $55,000 off a $200,000 house is a lot bigger than $55,000 off, say, a $700,000 house. So one of the things the legislature did through the Property Tax Commission is we went to a percentage-based exemption. So you get starting in 2026, you'll get 10% off the first $700,000 of value. That really changes the math for rural communities that we are really trying to protect. We don't want to erode their taxing base. Of course, the assessors couldn't do this right away because it's actually a lot more complicated than it sounds. So we went to just for 1 year, a strict 6.4 assessment rate reduction. Now, the thing I want to point out is, yes, we've made it more complicated, but you can blend these numbers so that you can see what the effective assessment rate is when you calculate two different assessment rates. And I'm not a math person, folks, so like it's a miracle I'm even up here talking to you. But as you can see, right, is that like these are the blended rates that we're going to move to. Right now, right when this whole debate started, we were at 7.15%. We've gone down to 6.95, and now we're down for this year to 6.17%, right? So my point is that a spike occurred, and the legislature, I think, moved very responsibly to lower assessment rates. And also, we haven't talked much about commercial. You're also seeing us stepping down the commercial rate in this proposal as well. Bottom line here is I'm going to say this. The legislature has already cut $1.2 billion of statewide property tax revenue across the state. That is a big amount. They've also used some of their money, right? These are two totally different streams of revenue, right? State takes income tax, sales tax, right? Local governments use property tax and sales tax revenue at the local level. Completely different revenue streams, and we have been mixing them now for 3 years, and it's really bad policy. Let's go to the next slide. We can come back to this. So let's just talk about these measures real quick. I think Paul talked a little bit about Initiative 50. Let me say something. Caps exist. They're all over the country. 38 states have various property tax limitations. Property tax caps usually come in two forms. On your local community, i.e. Boulder cannot collect more than a certain percentage of revenue growth, or it's a cap on your home's value or property tax growth, right? California has the infamous Prop 13. Prop 13 limited the amount your property value for taxing purposes could go up. That is what caps look like in this country. No state does what Initiative 50 is proposing to do. Because Initiative 50 puts a dome, this is from the Simpsons movie, Initiative 50 puts a giant dome over the entire state of Colorado and says, all statewide property tax revenue, not just your community, but every single, all that 4,600 districts across the state cannot go up more than 4%. We'll talk about the implications soon. Also is a constitutional amendment. And I think all of us here know how hard it is to get things out of the Constitution once we put it in. We could go to the next slide. So, okay, this is actually kind of what Paul was talking about, right? Colorado Sun did an analysis of just how often our state's total statewide property tax revenue has gone over 4%. Only 15 times in the last 60 years have we not gone over 4%. We know that local communities as a whole will lose about $1 billion of local revenue capacity. All those districts are now competing with each other, okay? So, and 57% of statewide growth in this assessment cycle came from the Denver metro area. If you're from a rural community, this does not work for you. You are constantly going to be crowded out. The other thing, and now I'm suddenly working with folks from the bond industry, they're like, we can't do this. If your community passes a mill for a bond and you promise us that you're going to pay X amount, and then next year the state finds out that you're over the 4% limit, we got to wait on a statewide vote to know whether or not you guys have enough money to pay. So the entire bond market, I mean, literally 4 weeks ago, there were a number of projects that were put on pause because the bond houses would not originate the loans. So this, I just cannot tell you how complicated and ill-advised a scheme like this is. I think the good news is that many people were waking up to this. And my prediction is that Initiative 50 would have been pulled had the special session not come together because it was breaking up even the proponents' own coalition. Let's go to the next one. I'll just keep trying to move on this. So Initiative 108, totally different now, okay? 50 is a cap, 50 is constitutional. Initiative 108 is statutory. And on its face, it's kind of simple, right? We're just going to reduce assessment rates, right? But, you know, you saw earlier, and I can tell you when I was down at the Capitol negotiating on 233, my phone started blowing up when we got to 6.4. 6.4 for many districts was really, really low. And folks were like, we don't think we can go lower. They want to go to 5.7, okay? And so the result is, and then from 29 to 24 on commercial. And so the result is a $2.25 billion loss to every single taxing district across the state. But the real kicker, and I think the thing that made this a much more challenging measure to grapple with, is that, like Paul said, it required the state legislature to backfill those losses, right? And we have the, $16 billion state budget. If you ask us to take 2.25, actually, if we could go to the next slide, just robbing Peter to pay Paul is exactly what this is, okay? And at a minimum, and if my opponent was here, there are different legal interpretations, yada, yada. No, $630 million is the bare minimum that the legislature would have to find to backfill school losses, okay? And numbers would just go up from there. So, and I think the problem here is that, you can't sneak something past the voters, right? At the end of the day, there's a body in here somewhere. Someone's losing $2.25 billion. Is it the local governments? Is it the state government? Or is it going to be a little bit of both? And I think that was my fear. And I just, for those of you who follow the legislature, do you really think the legislature could ignore the fact that all the local governments in the state are missing $2.25 billion of revenue and would not feel compelled to fill in some of those gaps? Because after all, how do you run a school without a human services department? How do you run a school without, higher education? All these services are linked and are connected in an ecosystem. So if we could just move to the next slide. So, okay, so let's talk about this special session. So from my perspective, as somebody who's leading the campaign, our polling numbers look good for us. Both of these measures started in the 30s. Mostly because of their titles, because their titles were very complicated and I think showed some of the issues that we were talking about. Now, that's not to say that we, could have lost. We could definitely have lost. We knew that it was going to require, the other side was prepared to spend anywhere between $8 to $12 million on their campaign, and we would have to raise $4 million. we thought we were on the path to raising that amount of money. I think a number of people came together and said, this is crazy, right? And whereas I would have loved nothing more than to beat these measures, because the proponents have been bringing measures like these for a very long time. We can talk more about that. But now there is the possibility of a special session and a deal. I will do my best to walk through some of the issues. I believe strongly that what we have is a framework, not a deal. A framework is a framework, not a deal. And it remains to be seen whether or not the legislature or the stakeholders who are actually impacted by these things can live with this deal. So what is on the table is additional assessment rate reductions for both school districts and local governments. Okay, they want to move from 7.15% to 7.05%. And then they would say, if statewide property tax revenue goes up by 5%, then we'll go down more. Now, why would that be not great based on what I told you earlier?
Because the rural communities would suffer.
Right, because 5% for the state is not necessarily 5% growth in every other community. So one of my concerns here is, are you sure you want to use this trigger? Because what if you have a community that didn't grow by 5%? So, that's an issue that I and a few others have brought up. I think there are questions as to whether or not our school finance budget can handle this, but all told, we're talking about a $280 million loss on top of the $1.2 billion loss that I told you about. Now, what I would say is every community is different. Some communities are doing great. You saw on the map, they've seen increases. Some communities are not doing great. Some communities, believe it or not, haven't really recovered from the Great Recession when the housing market tumbled, right? Everybody's on a different journey. And I think that, I was glad to see in the latest draft that there will be some backfill. All right. In previous versions of this, we didn't backfill districts for any of those cuts. Maybe the state needs to consider, not for every district, but for some districts, that we got to plug the hole. Okay. So that's one component of what will be discussed next week. The next component will be caps. Now, I told you we put a 5.5% cap in place for local governments, and there was no cap for school district revenue. Now, I want to say something. For those of you who follow school issues, you'll recall legislators standing on the Capitol saying, we fought down the budget stabilization factor. That's the historic deficit and the debt we owe our schools under Amendment 23. Well, the only reason they were able to buy down the budget stabilization factor is because housing values went up and they were able to increase the local share. And that is why we were able to buy down the budget stabilization factor. So when we talk about putting a cap on revenue growth for school districts, we better be sure that that's the right cap. Because if we make a mistake and the cap is too low, then we will have problems with budgeting for schools in the future. Happy to go deeper into that. But for now, the budget director feels like we could live with that. I know there's people who are trying to adjust that cap. And then they want to change the just to give you a sense of how petty this is. We had an 11% over 2-year cap on local districts. They want to go down to 10.5. Okay. This is about saving face for billionaires who got up a tree and don't know how to get down. That's my editorial comment. There's also new language in here when a local government asks to override a cap. Okay. There's specific language that would be required in these measures. Okay. I will say, and this is just the last slide. I think there's like two issues that for me, I think are still challenging, and we'll see if folks can work through this. And they've been mentioned at the Property Tax Commission. So the first thing is we can't do this anymore. Okay. One of the reasons local districts did not reduce their mills, and don't get me wrong, I think districts got to get a lot more responsive to their constituents and should have lowered their mills. But one of the reasons they didn't is because of all this uncertainty. For 3 years, no district has known what the actual assessment rate is on property. No district could plan, right? So, I think there's a huge concern, not even just the politics, just like we can't run a state if we're constantly fighting over property tax policy. So we and a number of other people are trying to advance a new constitutional amendment that just says you cannot put statewide property tax ballot measures on the ballot unless you have a mechanism for local consent. It's just too it is too hard to pass one size fits all policies. I think local governments are very supportive of this. I know we've got a number of Democrats who are supportive of this. Unfortunately, the Republicans who did support this, of which there were many last year, have all been told to vote no on it. And so we are going to have to navigate that issue. But a lot of people feel structurally that a promise from one political group is not enough, okay, that this has to stop. The second issue, and it's not on here, is just that I would say that equity is a challenge. I didn't get into exemptions versus assessments, and I think there's a healthy debate as to who really needs the relief. But I think there are many people who believe that we should be giving property tax relief to people who are in mid, to low value homes. Once you start to get into the $2 million range, $3 million range, I think it does raise a question of whether or not you need as much relief. Now, I think Cynthia made a really good point. Markets are different. You may be sitting in a $3 million home and you're on a fixed income. There are ways around that. But I would also expect to hear a lot of conversation. 18 states have the primary homestead exception, which means that you don't get value exemptions on your second or third home. Get them on your first. That's an issue that will be debated this session. Now, whether or not all those things are a part of the deal and whether or not the proponents of 50 and 108 choose to walk away from this remains to be seen. I find it hard to believe that they would truly be able to run a campaign after all the horrible things that not just I, but many other people, including the governor, have said about 108 and 50. That said, I am hopeful that we can get to a place where we all don't need to spend collectively $15 million on this issue. I think we can get there. I just think that it gets dangerous when you negotiate with people who are threatening you. And at what point do you draw a line and say, okay, you've gone too far? So happy to answer any questions and participate in the panel. I hope that's helpful for all of you.
We're going to get to Q&A in just a couple minutes, and I'm going to turn it back to Representative Amabile, and just with a reminder that this panel, this would be the moment in the program where we would turn this over to the pro campaign, but they had to cancel at the last minute and we were not able to fill them in. So we've asked Representative Amabile to, as part of what she goes over here, fill in what the proponents of 50 and 108 and this compromise feel about this so that we're sharing a balanced presentation.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I can really do that. My business is bad.
Trying.
I've never even met Michael Fields, and I'm just sure I can't channel him. But I understand the idea, and I understand why voters, this is why, maybe we differ a little bit here. I'm 66 years old, and I'm a lot more risk averse than I used to be. And because I've seen a lot of sure bets not happen. I've seen a lot of deals that were going to close the next day, not close. And so I would be worried about us sending these measures off to get voted on and knowing that we maybe could raise 6 million, but maybe we only have 1 million so far, and they totally can get 8 to 10 million. And this message sounds pretty good to taxpayers. Your taxes aren't going to go up like they did the other year. That's never going to happen again. I think a lot of people that will resonate with them. And the polling, while it's bad, because good means you've already got, the day you start, you've got more than 60%. So it's bad if it's less than 60%, just to put that in context. That's before anybody spends any money on promoting this to voters or fighting it. And so I think it's wise of us to go back and have this special session, because if we don't, or if we go to the special session and we can't agree, and these ballot measures go forward and one of them passes, that's a disaster. And we'll all be looking around thinking, why didn't we come up with a compromise that works for everybody? And while I understand it's no fun to have the proponents of these measures kind of have all the leverage, that is the world we live in. I'm fully supportive of this ballot measure to change the way you can access the ballot for property tax. I think that's smart. I don't know whether we can do that now or whether we have to wait until the next session. and then try to get that through when we have more time and can be more thoughtful about it. I also don't know whether the General Assembly is going to have the votes required to pass that. And we might not have them now, but we might have them starting in January if we put a lot of effort into getting this supermajority in the Senate, because that's what you need to get the thing through. So I think there are some arguments for waiting. And, you know, maybe if it doesn't pass, if we try and it fails, then we know we can still do it in January if we end up with a reconstituted Senate majority. So I will also say that, you know, one of the things I was going to talk about, which Scott already did, was the difference between what's in 233 and what's in the deal that's being proposed. And one of the things I'm just going to say is that in 233, we left out whole swaths of non-residential real estate properties. And that should concern the business community because, like, for example, I used to have a business and we had a warehouse. We were industrial, and that wasn't in this thing at all. And you all know that you pay exactly how much the property tax bill goes up by every year in your triple. So it's different than residential, where you may or may not get a break because your landlord got a break. You do not get a break when you have a triple net lease and the property tax goes up. You pay every penny of that. And so I think in some ways, this is a little bit of a win for the business community that we're now taking all of the non-residential property and giving some tax relief.
What's the win? The compromise on the table or 50 or 108?
The win is the compromise that's on the table that encompasses all of the non-residential real estate or property.
Yeah, when you're passing legislation in 3 days, there are things that get missed, and the legislature lowered commercial improved versus commercial industrial. And I think that, and also state assessed was not included as well. So I think when the plan was to go into the next session and make that change. And, you know, I agree. And we didn't even talk about Gallagher. And the reason we repealed Gallagher was because commercial rates had gotten so high. And that was what was forcing residential rates down. But that was a big problem, right? Was that we really do need to lower commercial rates. And unfortunately, the market kind of got ahead of us and we ended up in a crisis before we could replace the Gallagher amendment.
Judy, I didn't mean to interrupt. Were you concluded with this?
Yeah, I mean, so that wasn't what Michael Fields might have talked about. But
Well, I'm thinking maybe, Paul, would you like to take a stab?
Want me to be Michael
Can
Fields?
you be Michael Fields?
it's better naturally suited for.
I don't want to make any assumptions, but.
No, I mean, I really could be. And it really is because governments can't control themselves. And I think that's what Michael Fields would say, is governments have a hard time controlling themselves. And this is from a guy who, you know, spent 12 years in the legislature, seen it. You know, now spent 9.5 years on the county level, seen it. It's very, very difficult given the pressures that government officials see from their constituents, the wants and needs that they have, to say no when there's an opportunity to fund it and say yes. And since governments can't control themselves, we the people, me, Michael Fields saying this, need to control it for them. Which is why, you know, you told me last time that you got what was your raise last time? You got a cost of living raise of 3%. You feel a little good about it. Well, we're giving governments an extra percent. We're giving them 4%. They got a better cost of living raise than you did. If you're on Social Security and everything, why not? I mean, I think that he would say that since they can't, you need an absolute cap. He could transition that really easy to a 108 and say, okay, we recognize that governments have this need to do services. Look at how much the state budget's changed. When I was in the legislature, the state budget was $8 billion, right? What is it now? 18.8? 16.8? Yeah, that's a pretty significant jump. And what are they really doing with it? And can they do it better by doing it back up? Now, that's probably as good as I could get on a Michael Field. I can't tell you, if I was still in the legislature, I'd take a totally different approach to what they're taking. You know, a lot of people don't understand this math formula of actual value times your assessed value gets what your taxable value is, and that's how we determine your taxes. And I can tell you what, at least in Boulder County, you didn't see that on your tax bill unless you flipped it over and saw the formula on a little chart of what it took. What I would do if I were in the legislature, say, okay, we already have something that works in the law. It's called the senior homestead exemption. For the next couple of years, let's take a concept of the senior homestead exemption where we take 50% off your first $100,000 of value, and you don't have to pay that. We, the state, will pay that. Gets them out of the backfill game, gets the local districts the revenue that they're expecting and budgeting, and gets the taxpayers something that they can see that says, oh, hey, the state just saved me $600. And I don't know what that dollar would be. How much percentage off of a commercial property would you need to take off to have that hit? Or off of a residential property, or the double of a senior, or a low home. What, I don't know what, I don't know the math. There's people, yeah, I know how to carry the one and all that. There's people much better at math than me, including the guy who says you can't do math. That they can figure out what that is. We, the state, would be backfilling, X amount of dollars. Instead of backfilling, well, let's just not collect it from the taxpayer to begin with as we do, but let's backfill it in a way that they can see what we're doing. Let's backfill it in a mechanism that the assessors already have, rather than playing with the assessment rates, mill levy, and the assessment changes for all these different things. And let's take a piece that's visible to the voters of what we're doing to save them actual money. That's what it ain't as easy as it sounds, and none of the work that they do is as easy as it sounds. But to me, that would be the approach beyond 233, beyond a special session that I would take. I think there's a way to do this where we can get relief for the taxpayers with protecting the local districts without the problems that were pointed out for rural areas, and without putting ourselves in a way that when we hit the bust, we're not stuck. And I frankly think that that's the way, but I've been wrong before. I'm wrong a lot. That's my
Thank you for role playing with us. And I actually wanted to turn back to you also and just ask if you can, before we invite questions, tell us what is on the table. Like, do we know at all what people might be able to advocate for? What are the?
Yeah. Okay. So there is a draft of the bill. And like I said, there's 19 bills that are going to get run. I don't know what's in 18 of them, but I've heard some rumors. And Scott alluded to a couple of them. So he knows more than I do. But the main bill, the reason we're going back, is there's a draft of that available. And I'm happy to share that out I can send it to you and you can disseminate it to your members. And what's on the table? Well, within any bill, it can be amended, and in committee, any committee member can offer amendments on the floor. Any member of the General Assembly can offer amendments to that bill and have them voted on. So you all can lobby if you want things about that changed. The rub here is that we have the proponents of these ballot measures who are at the table. And they are going to be weighing in on these amendments and telling us, well, if you pass that amendment, then no deal. And so we're going to have to weigh that. And you all have to weigh that too. Like, if I really want to push for a particular amendment and it clears the deal, so to speak, then we're back to the $15 million of trying to fight these ballot measures with an uncertain outcome. So I think a lot of my colleagues feel like we're in a tough spot because we're not just negotiating amongst ourselves around what we think is the right thing to do. And so that's the world we're in. I want to say two more things. When we talk about the local money as the local government's money and the state money is kind of, I hear my colleagues say that's our money. The state legislature's money, But none of it is any of our money, it's all your money. And I want to be really clear about that. The state, I don't have any money in the state legislature. I have your money. It's not my money, it's your money. And I think that's an argument too that Michael Fields might make, is that all of this is yours. And you have to make some calculation about what kind of services do you want. You know, one of the other places that's, if the state is backfilling, if they're taking your property, your sales tax and your income tax, and we're backfilling property tax with that money, what are we not going to be doing that you may or may not like? Like one of the conversations we've had a lot in this room is around homeless solutions and how the local government doesn't have any money for that, and the county government doesn't have any money for that, and that should come from the state. Well, let me just tell you, we won't spend a penny on that because those people don't have a lobbyist. And so unless there's money to spend on it, that's gonna be the bottom of the rung. And also Medicaid, because the state has a huge part to play in Medicaid. And we've been asking every year for Medicaid to get more involved in housing, in extending the amount of time somebody can stay in the hospital. But we have expanded Medicaid greatly, and we will not do that. We will contract Medicaid if we end up having a much smaller state budget. And maybe none of you are on Medicaid, but a lot of the people who live in this community, 25% are on Medicaid, and their benefits will be severely curtailed.
Fighting words, Representative Buckland. Thank you for that. We can give a round of applause to our panel before. Really informative. And now I want to see, I hope that some of you have questions and your brains don't hurt too much from all that we've learned so far. If not, we'll come back to the panel. But first, let's open it up and see who's got questions. Devin will bring you a microphone if you do.
Maybe
Although I do
I'll
think
just
you
start
can
real
also-
quick, just getting a sense from Scott, just given the campaigns. Can you just speak to how the sides have lined up? Who's been at the table in terms of supporting the initiatives? Who's been opposed?
Yeah, I think thank you for that question, because I actually think it's really important for folks to understand that the proponents of the measures, really two organizations. One is called Advance Colorado. It is a conservative entity. They spend what we call dark money. We don't know who their funders are. And year after year, we have seen a number of fiscally conservative ballot measures running the gambit from them. What changed this year was that Colorado Concern, which is a business organization but represents mostly CEOs from the Denver development community, teamed up with Advance Colorado, and then they were in fact proponents of both these measures. What was interesting for me as I started to shift from the Bell Policy Center to the campaign was, you had your kind of usual folks, folks concerned about some of the issues that Representative Kabalo talked about. Obviously, CEA, NEA, the teachers union, was a partner with us in this campaign. But what was very interesting for me is that I ended up finding a lot of support from developers who rely quite a good deal on public-private bonding to finance their projects. And so I kind of got a front row seat to a civil war within the development community and some very strong feelings on both sides there. But people shaking out weird on this issue. John Caldera from the
liberal, John Caldera.
Yeah, he actually came out and opposed 50, and it was like, this is weird. But he actually kind of saw a mirror version of some of the issues I saw around local control. So I think mostly we just had there were a lot of groups who were ultimately just hostages in this. I think higher education in particular, just felt like, what does this have to do with any of us, and why have you taken us hostage? So the breakdown was weird on this one. And like I said, I think there was so much division around Initiative 50 that we thought it was pretty likely that it would go away because you just had so much disagreement within the development community. I also think local governments have just been interesting in how they've shown up in this. You have a number of associations And they, they were obviously quite concerned. So we did have the backing of many local governments, as well as chambers. The Vail Valley Partnership had opposed the measures, because I think what's also very interesting is that you have a number of chambers and business communities that are deeply invested, as I'm sure you are, in all of this public infrastructure. You also have districts like Colorado Mountain College, Ames Community College that are actually that derive some of their revenue from property taxes. And so you also have health districts. So I'm running long, but it was a very interesting melange of interests that were coming together against these measures.
Great, thanks.
Well, and just to be clear, opposition to 50 was a lot more fierce than the opposition to 108.
That's actually something that I was of the belief of, but I was shocked when I was on a call with some of the developers who were opposing 50 said, oh, we don't like 108 either, because it would have permanently ratcheted down. So fog of war, everyone's got a different take on things, but I would say, I feel, and I understand the representative's points about risk, and I take them seriously. But there was a feeling among many of like, how much longer are we going to be bullied like this? And so for some of us, this is about more than property taxes. This is about year after year after year of ballot measures. But what's it?
Right.
The other thing, if I could just note one thing, I apologize. Everybody's watched like the housing market and the commercial market, and Cindy could talk more about this than me. I think that the ballot measures, to some extent 233 in the special session, are playing on something that may be irrelevant next assessment year. Values are pretty flat and even down some places statewide. So this surge we had in values, which hell, my biggest asset, my biggest investment, someday I'm gonna sell it, is really a blip. I mean, this whole debate might be irrelevant for at least the following 3 years.
Except for you did just tell us that only 4 times.
Yes.
In 18 or.
Well, 18 times in 60 years.
18 times in 60 years did it.
Under 4%.
I so there's some chance of it doing that statewide, isn't it?
Yeah.
So we're seeing very, very flat property values, and our early modeling, we're not there yet. We're seeing reductions in that.
Residential and commercial.
Yes.
Yeah, so we're seing the sales just aren't happening. The interest rates are high. People are risk averse. So, and I agree with Paul. I wonder if we do need to do something to control this for the future, but we really reacted to an unusual cycle. So this is anomalous. It went way high, flatten if not go down, and then it may normalize for the next 8 to 10 years. And so, what are we doing to ourselves and we're setting up laws?
Yeah. Somebody called Dionne Warwick at the psychic hotline. See what's going to happen.
We're going to Andrea next.
Before COVID.
I may have missed the introductory context to this, but I think you explained that the ballot initiatives have been now certified to go to the ballot. Is that right? And so then if this agreement is struck, can that repeal those initiatives?
Yes.
Okay, so then the next kind of follow on is, I agree with you, Judy, is that I don't think voters look that deep at these kinds of issues. They just see my taxes reduced, for sure, and go ahead and vote for these things. If these pass and we find ourselves in some kind of financial, quagmire, do then our counties or cities take this on to try to do something locally, individually, or where does it go if we do find ourselves there without a compass?
Well, so when Cynthia touched on this, there's some interesting repercussions. If 108 and 50 pass, the first thing that happens is that the relief that the legislature passed for 24 tax year, the tax year we are in, shuts off. And so, some could see that as a poison pill. It certainly is that. But also it's like, wow, well, our budget's going to crater next year, so we can't afford the relief we did this year. So if all else fails and these measures were to pass, then the relief for this year shuts off. And then starting in 25, you go to these new lower assessment rates and sort of the financial crisis that we've been talking about. I'll offer a perspective that not all share, which is, and I don't always share it, just depends where I am, which is, you know, maybe we have to look through the abyss here. I had a very good friend who is, you know, does this work. He said, look, if they win, they lose. Congratulations. We now have a $2.53 billion financial crisis that they're responsible for. You just, so, and that is, if I've worked in the governor's office, and that is not the perspective that a governor can take, right? You cannot, but at the end of the day, you know, at some point, these folks have put together measures that were so threatening and so catastrophic that, you know, so yeah, what does happen when we have this hole? And one might imagine that we could, from there, you know, rise up and fix the situation. But no, I mean, I think that's why there's so much. I think for me, the challenge is what I would be saying if I was sparring with my friend Michael Fields, is that, like, how is it in any way, shape, or form responsible to propose things that are so catastrophic to get your way? And I think that for me, I probably will go to my deathbed believing that these were always head fakes, that these were always designed to be massive threats, designed to get the legislature to do what they want. The legislature, like I said, 92 out of 100 votes is not easy to get in the legislature, and then they reserve the right to go into overtime. So that's all unprecedented. So again, I wouldn't be on the scope of your question, but those would be the real legal ramifications. At that point, you would probably see a number of local governments, because they can't raise mills without going to a vote. You'd see actually political consultants would do very well in that environment, because every single local district would then have to go back to the ballot to the voters to ask for mill increases, cap lifts, and all of that. Some communities would get them, others wouldn't.
And to the first part of your question, it really is that it would have to be a compromise to get the things off the ballot. They would have to choose the proposal to take them off. It wouldn't just happen in the legislature. It can be done till September 6th or 9th, I think.
And what the governor has said is the bill passes, the compromise bill, he doesn't sign it into law until they've taken those off the ballot. Because there's that level of mistrust happening. I just want to also though add that I really hope that I'm not thinking about this on my deathbed.
Who else has a question? And do you need a microphone?
It's not so much a
Andrea's
question.
got it right there.
This has been a problem for 3 years. Why are you just now doing a special session to really resolve it for what is perceivably a threat, when it just sounds like taxpayers are trying to, like, get you guys to step up to the plate?
Well, let me just say we have been trying. So, you know, 2 years ago, we voted to put HH on the ballot.
Yeah.
Then that didn't work out. So we have been running bills and we've been running ballot measures, but we still haven't gotten to the sweet spot where everybody's kind of in agreement. And also anybody can run a ballot measure. And so we don't at the legislature or in local government have control over that.
Yeah, 3 years seems like a long time.
Well, but just to add, I mean, you guys have just been trying. You've passed, you know, what I don't have up there and I have on a different slide, in other presentations, 3 years of legislation has been passed, 295, 303, 238, and now 233. The legislature has passed a series of bills. I would say that, yes, we know that taxpayers are concerned about these increases. That said, I hope we're not confusing Advanced Colorado and Colorado Concern with the taxpayers. These are very well funded. I mean, my understanding is that they've spent $8 million to get to here. That is not organic voter action. That is very specific interests that have a very specific target. It doesn't mean that the sentiment isn't there and that folks need to respond to it. The question is what is responsible? And there's just two sides of the ledger. And I think that's very challenging and should be happening at the local level. The problem is you're voting on strangers' taxes when you vote on statewide issues on property taxes. And it's a shame that local governments have not been more responsive. I wonder if it has something to do with the statewide politics. But I think local governments need to look in the mirror and say, what could I have done to prevent this?
How many of the things that you have passed in the last couple of years are permanent? Are they just like stopgaps or?
Well, I mean, the bill we passed in the special session last November was not permanent, it was temporary. But the bills before that were meant to be permanent. And what we passed last year set up this tax commission so that we could get this bipartisan support. I mean, I can't tell you how unusual it was that we passed 233 nearly unanimously with Republicans and Democrats on board. So, and that was meant to be a permanent solution.
Yeah, I mean, the business personal property tax exemption, if you're under 52,000 value, you don't pay, that's permanent. The mobile home exemption, if you're under 28,000 of value, you don't pay, that's permanent. Some of the, bill that can always change, but they're meant to be this, they go back to 0.9%, if for businesses to go back to, 7.5% for residents, and this really whacked out happens, are making permanent. So legislature really has actually, prior to this last session, and then prior to the last 3 days of the session, put things in permanent. The problem I see is that it's permanent but not visible. And that to me has always been the problem.
I'm gonna pull us back and wrap us up here, I think. I want to say, and I needed to say this at the outset and neglected to, we can only do these events thanks to sponsorship. So thank you to Google who sponsored this and WW Reynolds, who was our connection sponsor.
Yay.
Panelists, especially Cindy Braddock, who joined us here at the last second. Perspective, thank you. And thank you, Paul and Judy and Scott for being here. And Judy, Representative Motley, good luck next week. She's got 3 days to get us some hopefully well orchestrated tax relief.
I think we're gonna have more to do.
Uh-oh. All right, round of applause again.